Unfiltered, uncensored, and unapologetic. This is the Retail Warzone Podcast.
Real quick, we're going to hit the ground running here. This is going to be very much like it was for the Justice for Evan episode. We've got Vicki and Debra with us here this evening. And what they're going to do is I'm going to give them the floor. I'm going to kind of keep tabs of questions that come through the chat. So that way, I can feed those to them as we go. Let them educate all of us on this. And one thing we talked the other day, and this is something I really want to put out there, for those of us who have been in the business for a very long time, there are things that we've seen or maybe things we were part of or were told to do that became the norm. And it never occurred to us that, it could be bullying or it could be mobbing. And I think what we're going to find out as we go through these journeys, there's a lot of things we've learned to accept that were just totally wrong and should not have happened. So having said that, who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Vicki, you got this.
An underground phenomenon, yet it's enormous. The size of it is enormous. And we're here because we're part of the Justice for Evan team for the March 9th events. And that's really kind of our jumping off point tonight is, Evan was bullied and mobbed to death at his place of employment. And when I read the lawsuit, I just was taken aback because it was a blueprint of bullying and mobbing. And that's not so easy to do. It's not something we see because both bullying and mobbing are psychological abuse. And so it's things that you can't easily see. And it's actually sometimes in the non-response that is the response. But again, very just nebulous kind of behavior that's not easy to, put your finger on. But Evans, that lawsuit is, as I said, an articulate blueprint of bullying and mobbing.
It really does follow this playbook when you read through the lawsuit with the two supervisors initially harassing him around just wearing his mask around COVID, which is what Kroger had called for. That was their policy to wear a mask. And he was harassed for his political beliefs, and things just escalated from there. But it follows this playbook in terms of Evan being this great performer. There was this very vivid description in the lawsuit of an audit that he had as a dairy manager, and just the different timestamps of when people put outdated product, or he perceived that people were putting outdated product to sabotage his audit, and he had stayed late in order to make sure that his audit wasn't going to get sabotaged, and all of these other abuse mechanisms that were used. There was sexual harassment involved that he had reported. There was threats of tracking his internet usage. It all kept escalating to the point where people were following him home and staying outside of his home for great lengths of time. And neighbors were reporting on this. This wasn't just him who observed this. And it really, it also escalated to the point where after he was told that they were going to monitor his internet usage, that they had also sent him child pornography. And it escalated to this point where, he was written up several times after this audit had happened. And it got to this point where he felt trapped, and, which we've seen in other situations where people feel like there's this impending abuse for things that never happened. He felt like he had ended up quitting, but he felt like he was going to get fired. And then he felt like he was going to receive criminal consequences for the child pornography piece of it. And that's around the time, the day that he was supposed to have a meeting with his supervisor, was the day that he died, where he took his life. And, he had an episodic break before that, and just really clearly couldn't see other options for this. It became this like hopeless situation where no matter where he turned, there was nobody helping him who should have. So we see this a lot in those dynamics of someone who's just this great employee being targeted for whatever reason. Their supervisor sees their competence as a threat, or they want to replace them with somebody else, which was the case here with Evan. And it escalates to the point where the person questions themselves. They're convinced that they're incompetent, or they're just convinced that things are happening that aren't, or vice versa. And then they're driven to this point of reporting a problem. And then that's where that mobbing comes in, where either the department or other people are joining in on the abuse, or the company is ignoring their situation. And in Evan's case, both were happening. He had reported the sexual harassment. He had reported the abusive behavior, and they wouldn't even, they wouldn't even allow him to transfer to a different store. So, that's when like I said, the tactics escalated, and he felt alone and vulnerable. And this is sort of like the abuser playbook that we see time and time again.
Now, Vicki, what were the statistics you said, like the percentage?
Well, from 2017, I know there's more recent statistics, but I don't know them off the top of my head. But in 2017, there was a Zogby National Scientific Survey done by the Workplace Bullying Institute, and over 60 million people were bullied and mobbed in the workplace in 2017. That actually was the year that I was tormented day in and day out by a bully in the workplace. And at the end of it, just as Evan did, I reported to the proper authorities. I did all the right things. But because employers are not liable for psychological safety, they proliferate it to avoid liability. So, I reported the bully, but my employer did nothing about it. They just let me remain under that day-to-day stress. I was under the stress for 15 months. And like Evan, when I did realize that I was going to be fired, and so when I went out, I just left work and went out, on FMLA, which I was grateful for. So we, again, getting back to, Evan's story, that's what he did. He was doing his job. And by the way, targets like Evan, like myself, Deb, we've all been targets of bullying. The descriptors of targets they are the best employees. They're dedicated employees. They're hardworking employees. And Evan exemplified all of that. He had been there for 19 years. He never missed a day of work. He, and had never been written up. He was an exemplary employee, and he was being tormented. There's obvious, people knew it, and there was evidence that he was being tormented by two other people. And his company, he reported it. He went to the ethics line. He went to his union steward. He did all the right things he was supposed to do, and his employer ignored it. And so, again, this is where I was saying it's kind of nebulous, but, Kroger is not doing anything, is doing something. What they did was they left him in a cesspool of stress. And silent killer stress that's what silent killer stress kills. And Evan was, it was bad enough, the stress that he was under with the bullies. And then when his company just left him in all those letting this audit happen, and violating him as a person with all these other accusations. And, he left his job, he quit. And, from there, we know he had a break after, a mental break. And that's what happens. People can only take so much stress. We're all different. The same, boiling water that softens the carrot hardens the egg. And not to say that, that Evan was, weak or anything. He wasn't. He just was tormented to the point where he snapped. He had no other threshold. He was, I know most of us, and I speak because I am one of those 60 million people, and I am shoulder to shoulder with people who have been bullied and mobbed in my life these days. And we, have done the best that we can under these things, but we all come out and we're all sick. Most of us have PTSD. If Evan had lived, he would have been significantly sick with a lot of health harm, as are most of us who have experienced this in the workplace.
Anything you'd like to add, Deb?
I think it's important too Vicki's always emphasizing the mobbing side of it. And I think it's important to just kind of describe how that happens, because it's such a common occurrence with workplace abuse. It's generally, it generally starts with one person who is threatened by the competence of a high performing person. It's not always that situation, but it's commonly that situation. And then it can often be a situation where that person who has the power and control, because this is all about power and control, they write the narrative once they realize that they want to go after somebody. And having an isolated bully is one thing. I mean, if this were happening in a healthy work culture where, they did proper investigations and they did give consequences for the bully, then that would be one thing. But most often that actually happen. What happens is the bully will, tell their boss that this person is a problem. They'll start to question their mental health or their performance, and then they'll start to put bugs in people's, the coworkers' ears, so that they'll realize that if I, side with this person, then I'm going to get targeted too. And so it just becomes this like smear campaign where the person who's being targeted really feels isolated, and then their performance does start to decrease because they're ridden with anxiety and depression and stress and all of these other effects of the trauma. And not only that, but when they do decide to follow the protocol that they're taught by their employer, especially when they're training on, discrimination issues, or if they are training on workplace abuse, then someone might go to HR or a higher expecting some sort of consequence for the bully. And I believe Vicki mentions that the employer is only concerned about their own liability. So even in like very clear-cut discrimination cases, we see that, the employees have been trained. They then go to HR when something happens, expecting them to actually do something. And then they don't do something. And it leads to this very big sense of betrayal. And not only that, but the employer does what they can to push out the liability, which is the person who's complaining, instead of actually addressing it, instead of doing a proper investigation, something that's swift, something where they're trying to collect the evidence and talking to witnesses and making some sort of decision about how to handle the situation. So that mobbing piece of it is really a strong piece of it, because there's, we believe that the employer is going to do something about it. And then when they don't, it's this huge, huge sense of betrayal. And then a lot of people also believe that this has to be illegal, and it's not. It is when it comes to being a protected class. So if you are being discriminated against for your race or gender or disability or age or a whole number of protected classes, There is legal recourse, but even that is really, the cards are stacked against people who report. They, it's basically this David versus Goliath situation where the employer has all the resources, all this money, and the relationships with the, they're going to have definite legal representation, and those lawyers are going to have relationships with the courts already. And it's just like, the little guy going up against this army, and this it's a rigged system. It's really designed to keep the people. I always say keep the people who write the rules it keeps those people in power. So it's really a system where the people who are in power are doing whatever they can to maintain that power. So I just wanted to really emphasize how that mobbing piece works, and how it can lead to PTSD, because people have an expectation here and they're like extremely disappointed, and that's where the trauma, the shock of it all can come in.
So there was something that was in the chat. Why do you think it seems to typically be the exemplary employees that are getting targeted?
I mean, I can chime in on that. It's such a convoluted phenomenon, and when you keep pulling back the layers, it's just you shake your head. You never sit there and go, wow, yeah, this makes sense. It doesn't make sense. But bullies, I guess we have to go back and talk about them. We've talked about targets being hardworking. Bullies, their MO is that they're very highly insecure and jealous. So that's kind of what happens here, is that people who are in the workplace and they feel, for whatever reason, they feel insecure, they feel threatened by people who do their job well. And so what they have to do is everything in their power to eliminate that person who is the good, because they don't want, they look better when the good person's gone. So that's kind of a long story to say that, Evan could have done Shannon Frazie's job with just his baby finger. He was a good manager and a leader, and she must have been threatened by that. And Joseph Pig, he has, a history of bad behavior. Again, they don't want someone like Evan in the workplace because it makes them look bad. And then the employer gets caught in the double bind because they're not. So what are they going to do if they address the bad behavior, the psychological abuse of the bully? Then they're kind of admitting that there's a liability issue here, and employees don't want to do that. So instead, they just let the good employee just blow up in the fumes of the stress.
Now, Deb, you had mentioned, about people staying in power. Do you believe that one of the reasons like the really good employees get targeted like Evan did is because they're not going to fall rank and file into like what they would consider their clique, and they consider them a threat to whatever kind of system they're trying to run?
Yeah, I was going to add to what Vicki said. I think a lot of people who are focused on power and control instead of the health of the organization is that they surround themselves with people who like are yes people, who will do, who might kiss up to them, and who reinforce their power because that's what they care about. Their own, it's all about their own ego. It's all about their own power and control. So they instead of actually caring about the bottom line or the well-being of their employees, they just care about maintaining the power that they have attained and, making their decisions to reinforce that at pretty much all costs. I mean, to anything they can do to maintain that power.
There was a question that came across. What do you guys think fosters bullying more? Company culture, lack of legal protections, or is there something else?
I think it's a number of things. I mean, definitely the work culture, definitely HR departments and higher ups deferring to their legal departments on this. It's also our overall culture that reinforces both positive stereotypes and negative stereotypes. So this issue, even though we have discrimination law, and it's not very effective, but this issue is so intertwined with discrimination. So a lot of this is certain demographics doing what they can to keep themselves in power and playing on, the positive stereotypes of their demographic group and playing on the negative stereotypes of other demographic groups. So we see this a lot around, stereotyping women as highly emotional, or age stereotypes, race stereotypes, people with disabilities stereotypes, and just doing what they can to reinforce those stereotypes to maintain this social hierarchy and to maintain like obedience around, people's ranks within that social hierarchy. So I think it's the overall culture. I think it's the work culture. And I also think it's the mindset of the abuser and realizing that a lot of those insecurities are deeply rooted in childhood. And I think once people who are targeted realize that this isn't about them, it can become about, some of the responses that they have. But abuse is abuse. There is nothing that excuses it. And there is nothing that excuses it from starting in the first place. So, I think that understanding that piece of it and how deeply rooted it is with insecurities, like Vicki mentioned, can really help people detach from what's happening and just understanding those like main three layers that contribute so much to this.
Now, you would think that Evan's track record would be enough evidence that there was something wrong because, he was an employee for 19 years with not a blemish on his record until these managers show up on the scene. Yet that obviously was ignored. It's not like anybody said, okay, he's called, like you said, Vicki, the hoax line, to report, and nobody took the time to look, well, this guy doesn't have a blemish on his record at all, and he's been a long-term employee. Now all of a sudden there's issues, any company worth their salt would at least just from that be like, okay, maybe there's something we need to go check out, but they absolutely didn't.
And that's typical, Steve. That's the way it is. I was at my place of employment for 21 years. Every one of my performance evaluations exceeded expectation. And again, I speak for a lot of the people that we, again, shoulder to shoulder with. That's their story. Like Deb said, it's a playbook. Our work habits and ethics are similar. We were all long-term, really good, hardworking employees. So that Evan fell right into the right category. It doesn't matter if you're a good employee. It matters. All they are thinking about is we have to avoid liability, and it's a group think at the top of the company, like Deb said, power, hierarchical. The legal department, HR, directors, they're making six figures. They don't care about the employees. All they can see is that paycheck. And they're getting paid real good money to look the other way for abusive behavior.
Yeah, and Shannon Frizzy was the store manager, right? Vicki, is that? Yeah. So I guess the question is who's holding her accountable in the situation before the lawsuit? If she wasn't reporting what was happening, and I'm not really sure how the Kroger structure works, if there's some sort of district manager or, but it's negligent for the government to not be holding employers accountable when these things happen. They just completely get away with it because nobody's checking on them. Nobody's giving them consequences. There's no incentive. I mean, there's there's like a moral incentive and, caring about your organization, that's an incentive to care about these situations. But if you are egotistical and focused on your own power and control, then there's nothing that's going to, at least in our culture, nothing that's going to give an employer like that accountability.
I will tell you, from my history of watching store managers come and go, I do find it very peculiar that regardless of what side of the fence Kroger actually sits on with this, that they have not moved that person kind of out of, that store, kind of away from the public eye or something. I find that very, very interesting because from a liability standpoint, they're setting themselves up for a whole lot more. And it kind of tends to go along with what, Vicki has said, both of you talk about the power structure. It's really like no one cares about that store at all, because if they did, they'd make some moves, even if it was just to protect themselves, and they're not.
Or on the flip side, admitting liability if they did move her. I mean, that's sort of the other way of looking at it, is if they did something about it, they might be admitting some kind of fault, and they don't want to do that.
Well, perception, yes, but they could paint it in such a way that it's not.
Right, yeah.
It's to their, they buy into it with, like when you don't, when the bullies find out that their employer isn't doing anything about their bad behavior, it emboldens them. And they go at it, which now, so like my abuser and Evan's abuser, they go at you, they just keep going at you harder and faster. So the abuse escalates and you're under that stress. And to your employer, because this is their plan, they want the good employee to go so that they, because when Evan goes, they had no more threat of liability, or so they thought, because, Evan's, this story has ended horrifically. And so there is going to be liability. But that's the plan for the 60 million people, is they let that employee implode from under the stress. And so that bully being emboldened, it furthers their mission. So the bully keeps at that person, the employee implodes, they leave, no more threat of liability, and that employer just goes on again. And yes, the inside of the company, in these companies, they're horrible. They're toxic work environments. It might have been okay, maybe, because this is a phenomenon that's been going on for about 40 years. So in institutions that are that long, or even 20 years, when you have a culture like that, it does infiltrate. As I said, I was in a work environment for 21 years. And when I left, there were other things, going on. But there was another 25-year employee, and she was retiring. And she said to me, I've never seen it like this. And, and so it does implode, and they are shooting themselves in the foot. But you got to remember, all they care about is their 6-figure paycheck. They don't understand what's happening in the middle of their company. They have no idea.
So go ahead, Deb.
And they don't care. Yeah, I was just going to say, and they don't care. They just, they're like, they're living in that bubble. They just want to do what they can to maintain their power. And that's why a lot of them are so out of touch with what's going on, because it's just, not on their radar. It's not in their self-interest to monitor their culture or to, know about these types of things.
So from your guys' experience and, all the work that you've been doing with this, can you kind of go over maybe just a few things that maybe a lot of people in the workforce have dealt with that they think are day-to-day things that are just things that should not happen, that may indicate that they're being targeted?
Yeah, I can go through some things. I mean, one of the more obvious things is verbal abuse. So, this could be like name calling, harsh criticism, rumors, gossip, backstabbing, threats, that sort of thing. And I mean, the list goes on and on about, you know, the types, the actual tactics people use. But then there's sort of like more undermining the sabotage approach. This could be like excluding people from meetings, not giving them the resources that they need. It could also be treating them unfairly, doing what's called gaslighting. So, you know, convincing somebody that, or convincing somebody that their reality is not their reality. Whether that's like omitting information or making them believe something else is the truth. But that sort of unfairness can take the form of things like demoting somebody without cause, micromanaging them, having inconsistencies when it comes to rules across the board, discounting their accomplishments, blocking their requests for leave or training, removing responsibilities with no explanation, which is something that happened with me. Unreasonably heavy workloads, putting someone in a position to underwork. It can be unrealistic deadlines, and then like pestering or tampering with people's personal belongings, just sort of messing with them. And then just being vague or having like vague deadlines and then reprimanding somebody for missing a deadline, having really vague work expectations, and then again reprimanding them for not adhering to those expectations. And then like we've talked about the mobbing piece of it, where it escalates to, you know, essentially like the group bullying aspect, where someone's controlling the narrative, isolating the person that they're targeting, and then like having the whole policy for reporting these situations really be like a smokescreen. A lot of companies will pay lip service to certain values and then not uphold them at all. And so all of that, I mean, that's just sort of, broad strokes about like some of the tactics that get used, but it's usually lumped into some sort of verbal abuse or sabotage. And a big one that we've seen is using performance reviews to undermine people. So like Vicki mentioned, having like this great track record, and all of a sudden maybe a new boss comes in and they want to hire their own people, which is a common sort of scenario for bullying. And they will start to put together a paper trail of, you know, what they're calling bad behavior. It's usually false accusations. And their whole goal is to push the person out, but to have that like documentation behind it. And then, you know, a lot of times there will be a performance improvement plan or a PIP involved. But really just this whole smear campaign that from the outside looks legitimate and like they're looking out for the best interests of the organization, when really they're all about power and control and maintaining that power and control. I don't know if you have anything to add.
I would just like to say, I guess, you know, those were a lot of bullying things. And for me, in complete hindsight, is that mobbing, you know, you'll know, and this, usually we don't know that we've been mobbed until we've left the workplace. So this is kind of a, if this happens to you, then you know, just get out of there. It's when you report and your supervisor tells you she's going to take care of it and never does. And then you go to HR and they tell you there's a complaint process, and you go through the complaint process and 3 months go by. So, you know, I mean, it's like, it's that stalling. If someone isn't addressing someone else's abusive behavior in your work environment in the short term, then you are in an abusive work environment. And I can just tell you, do yourself a favor and start looking for another job. My husband was all over me about, you know, because of course he was listening to me, but he was all over me about finding another job. He bought me a new iPhone. He was doing everything to get me out of there. And I was just so determined to stay, because I didn't do anything wrong, and because I was a long-term employee who was.
Uh-oh. It seems like we lost them. There we are.
Okay. I'm not sure if Vicki.
That was weird.
Yeah, I hear that. What Vicki had said, I hear that a lot from targets about like, well, I'm the one who deserves to stay, and like I didn't do anything wrong, so I'm gonna fight this. And while that's all true that they are the ones who deserve to stay and they don't deserve to lose their jobs over it, it is a rigged system. There's this huge asymmetry of power. It's built on bias. And going up against that army is really a fight that's almost impossible to win. I mean, when there's collective action, that can be more hopeful, or the media is involved, or there are just certain scenarios that might help, but more often, or at least in my personal experience, my approach was I don't want to give this employer any more power than they've already tried taking from me. So I'm just going to move on and live my best life. And of course, I realized that there was more to that. There was more healing involved, and, the post-traumatic growth aspect of it. But I didn't want to give more. I didn't want them to take more from me than they already had. I did not want them to consume years in a lawsuit, even though I had nothing to sue them for, because there is nothing, my boss, or she wasn't my boss, but my bully was a woman. And I didn't think I could sue for discrimination, but I also didn't want to. I wanted to kind of walk away from the energy that they had taken from me, moving forward in my career. So, yeah.
Well, when I talked to y'all yesterday, something that, I think is really, really important, and you don't realize it until you get out. Okay. You mentioned like the different tactics and the paper trails and stuff like that. You mentioned a playbook. Well, as a manager, you're taught the playbook. You're taught to use those. And like I told y'all yesterday, there were situations where I had district managers come in and tell me they wanted me to fire the entire staff. And what did they say? Start documenting everything they do, paper trail it. So when you look at a culture like that, you're being taught from the top down. You're not looking to enhance people's performance. You're looking to eliminate problems. And that's how they really look at it. It's like, okay, here's your steps of what you're going to take. Make sure you get their signature on this piece of paper. And then when we get enough on them, we're going to send them out the door. And that's the playbook. I mean, that's performance evaluations. You're 100% correct. That can be a tool of pain intentionally, because 9 times out of 10, as a store manager, you're not allowed to have the final say. And if that district manager does not like a certain employee that you're praising, they'll shoot it down and make you give them a lesser score to help push them out the door.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about the people in power control the narrative. And, as we've seen with discrimination law, employers are going to find whatever loopholes they can to maintain their power. Luckily, we've seen with the Great Resignation that people we're still trying to push for a law so we can prevent this behavior from happening, and expand rights for workers, and all different ways of, the workplace abuse is happening. But, there are other policies or just trends, I guess, that will also help get at this, like the Great Resignation being one of them. Pulling healthcare, separating healthcare from jobs, can provide more of a safety net for people. Just anything we can to get at providing more of a safety net for workers, and making it easier for them to leave a toxic situation rather than them feeling like, they're put in these positions to decide between their health and a paycheck, and they're forced with these really tough decisions, because a lot of people, they might be a single parent, they might have a whole family to support. I mean, there's a whole host of very stressful situations that could compound after leaving a stressful job. So,
from the awareness standpoint, now, Vicki, I know both of you have testified and whatnot, and I know we kind of touched on legislation. Kind of tell everybody, as you guys try to propose this for what it is, which is, mental health related, okay? The pushback that you guys have gotten from advocating that.
I can't say that it's pushback that we've gotten, but it's lack of awareness. As we said at the beginning, this phenomenon of bullying and mobbing is so covert and difficult to understand. People don't know that it exists. When you say someone's been, when I was saying to people, someone's bullying me, people imagine that it's just someone, yelling at you, or they might even think, well, gee, maybe, Vicki is being a pain in the neck and she deserved it or anything, but they don't understand that there is someone who is tormenting you with all the tactics that we talked about, day in, day out, hour on hour. You're interfering with your work on multiple levels. It's mental torment. So again, it's not just that's the biggest problem. So that's why, for March 9th, next week and everything else, we have been, partnering with the Justice for Evan campaign because, we brought our experience to their campaign. They have done such a phenomenal job. Jana, Erica, Amy, getting the word out there to what happened to Evan. And not one of them, they haven't been bullied. They didn't even know what bullying was, but here they were like fighting our cause. And so, that's what has, brought me to this, to stand with them, as well as many others. We have, I believe it's 12 or 13 states. We have a team at the White House on March 9th. And most of these, outside of Jana, Erica, and Amy, all of those posts are going to be manned by former targets of bullying and mobbing, because this has just been such a, I don't know how to say it, because it's such a horrific thing. Evan Seyfried died. He was bullied and mobbed to death at work. He did nothing. This was preventable. And it's just been so overwhelming for all of us to just stand by. We can't stand by. And they have had a cry for justice for Evan from day one. And I think Amy had buttons made, days into Evan's passing. And I have one on, and we're going to be wearing them at the March 9th event.
Again, I can just add on to that, Steve. I think one of the issues, to add to what Vicki said, is one of the issues is definitely public awareness. I think people who haven't experienced this can sometimes victim blame, and they don't want to believe that this could also happen to them. They want to believe that we live in this just world where the person who's being targeted had to have played some role in the abuse that happened to them. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is that, aside from this workplace abuse and mobbing needing to be household terms, just like we needed to make domestic abuse a household term. And this phenomenon does parallel the way that domestic abuse operates. A lot of businesses, though, aren't going to come out publicly and oppose this bill. They're going to do it quietly behind closed doors, just like the abuse happens in the first place. And unfortunately, our state legislatures, which is where we've been trying to pass legislation, also want to, the leadership also wants to maintain their own power and control. So those the people who are making our policy are operating within some of the same structures. I mean, it's a place of employment, just like our places of employment. So it's really trying to navigate, trying to change policy through a structure that is also operating under these same structures that also maintain power at the top. And unfortunately, it's not run as democratically as we would hope. So, I think a lot of the opposition to, of course, there's some of the chambers of commerce and some of the business associations coming out publicly against this in hearings. But a lot of this work is also being done just by way of ignoring the situation. I mean, in Massachusetts, every 2-year legislative session, there are about 6,000 bills being introduced, and only some of those, I'm not sure how many actually end up being passed into law, but it's far fewer, 6,000. So it's really cutting through the noise, getting urgency behind this. And the whole goal is to just really create this groundswell of people saying that we've had enough. And people don't necessarily have to be so public about that. There are things that they can do privately. There are just ways to support this without necessarily, jeopardizing future job prospects. But of course, the more people who do publicly tell their stories, the more it gives permission for other people to share their stories. So in the 10 years or so or more that I've been working on this has definitely been something that I wouldn't say it's completely mainstream by any means, but it's in the news more and more. People recognize the term more of workplace abuse or workplace bullying. And there have been definitely strides made in terms of public awareness on it.
I mean, what do you think what's it going to take to get it to be looked at as, like an occupational hazard? Is it just going to be the awareness, or is it going to be able to find somebody that's in a place of high esteem that actually starts, championing the cause?
It's really hard to say. I mean, if we look at some of the movements throughout history, I mean, it just unfortunately is going to take a lot of people speaking up and just being really publicly vocal about this issue, whether that is somebody championing this, whether that's, a politician or a celebrity using their megaphone on it. I'm not really exactly sure what this will take. I know it's a marathon. I mean, I'm in Massachusetts. I know paid FMLA just recently passed, and it took about 20 years for that to happen. So, it's a long haul. I'm not sure exactly what it will take, but I do know that things that have moved the needle have required a movement behind them, and that's really what our goal is.
I think that's the huge thing, about the whole Justice For Evan movement is, as we've discussed and it's been talked about, big news won't cover it. And the only way you're going to get people to know is you're going to have to grassroot it. And that's a shame. It shouldn't be that way. But, there's such a stigma on mental health, within several industries, because there's that whole term liability. I think from a business standpoint, I can see them coming from the angle, well, who's going to classify it as a mental illness? What boxes do you have to check? Those kind of things. And they're still looking at it from a financial standpoint. They're not looking at it, as, the health of their workforce. And it still, to me, is just completely appalling that, you've got little podcasts out here, talking about this stuff, ad nauseum, but you can't get a major news carrier to cover it. And it's a story that should be told. It's a story that everyone should hear, and it's something that could have been prevented. And, people need to be educated that this isn't a joke. I mean, people aren't just making up weird stuff. I mean, we lost a living, breathing human being due to other people's behaviors.
Yeah, the fact that these big companies control our media, I mean, that's definitely a challenge in this. I mean, media in a lot of cases has become our justice system, and that would definitely go a long way if we could get some major media outlets to cover this issue. I mean, I think there's been some progress in it when you see some of these high-profile people being taken down around sexual harassment. I think there's some level of the needle moving forward when it comes to human rights and discrimination in general, and just mental health. But yeah, unfortunately, that's a big obstacle in this, because there's not this. They're not ready and willing to take on this issue because of their own self-interest. It always kind of goes back to what's in it for them to make a certain decision, and kind of predicting what's gonna make them take an issue on. I mean, luckily we have social media and blogging and different ways for people to share their stories. But yeah, it's a huge challenge without some of the major news outlets taking
it.
Yeah,
and they've got to be scared, because when I first started talking to Jana, there were journalists that I had contact with that, worked for some rather large publications. And I sent the story to them. I'm like, you might want to cover this. Crickets, not a word. Not a word. Mm-hmm. And, I'm thinking, this is the kind of story that if you cover it properly, if you're a journalist, can really help your career, and, if you do an expose on this kind of thing. Nope, not a word. Which is, that's just frightening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess luckily we're seeing some major outlets pick this up, but not nearly enough. I mean, there was a Washington Post article about Evan's story last July, I believe. And then, the Boston Globe in our area has picked this up a couple of times. There was the whole Scott Rudin case where he, story, I should say, where the film and Broadway producer who, he was sort of like the Harvey Weinstein of just general workplace abuse. Mm-hmm. And the Hollywood Reporter broke that story, and then the New York Times picked it up. So I think it's just, it's happening. It's just very slow and unfortunately not enough, which is disappointing.
Well, so. I do appreciate what you guys are doing. And, like I told you guys yesterday, going on my own little journey, with what I do, you learn a lot. And, when you take the blinders off, from carrying that set of keys, you start to realize, yeah, I thought it was messed up to begin with, but then you realize how really messed up it is. And, unfortunately, Evan's situation could have been prevented. And there's millions of people out there right now that are going through similar things that he did. And no one knows about it. And it's a dirty business, especially from the retail side. It's a dirty business. And mental health is the last of those companies' concerns. All they're worried about is money going in the till. That's it. So, what you and Vicki have been doing has been great. I've been extremely honored, being part of it, having the conversations with Jana and Jerry and Erica. Speaking of which, next Wednesday, I've been in contact with Erica. I know she's going to be joining me. We're going to try to do some sort of like wrap up of the events of that day. So if anybody's involved or whatnot, please send me pictures, videos or whatnot. It's going to be a recap of all the different things that happened that day, you know, with all the information that we can get, because I think it's appropriate to see. You know, it's real great. You know, you can see on social media these different things, but if we can encapsulate it and have it in one location where you can see all the different things that went on that day to see how important this really is, I think it's needed, and I think the family deserves it. So, but having said that, we're sitting at a little bit over an hour. Obviously, there may have been some transmission issues with Vicki. Deb, is there anything you want to close out with real quick?
I just want to thank you for bringing light to this situation, and you know, your covering of this whole issue around Evan and workplace abuse and mobbing in general. I mean, it is such a game of obedience and power and control, and like you said, once you kind of like pull the curtain back on it, I mean, you can really, it's a scary culture that some of these, a lot of employers are perpetuating. But you know, I think tools like this and educating people on it is so valuable to helping them name what they're going through, first of all, and being able to detach and then, you know, get out of their toxic situations and then start to heal. It's just such a powerful, it's just so powerful that you're helping people understand how this works. So
to that point, do you not have a podcast as well?
I do. Yeah.
Tell us about that real quick.
Yeah. It's called Screw the Hierarchy. It's about this overlap of workplace abuse and these social hierarchies that get reinforced, like I mentioned earlier. So it kind of started out as talking a lot about that, and I still do, but it also we also talk about a lot of like the healing side of things, anything from like how to deal with anxiety to limiting beliefs, all sorts of sort of tackling this issue from all sorts of different angles to help people understand what they're going through and how to move past it, or how to cope with it and heal from it. So.
Yeah, folks. So go check that out. Every voice is important. Every single voice. So it's like we had somebody on Twitter looking for somebody for a documentary about pharmacists, and, you know, looking for us to help them out to get some people. And I'm like, every voice matters. Here's you another place to go. So having said that, Deb, thank you so much for being here. I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
I will email Vicki and tell her thank you as well, seeing how there were some technical difficulties there. But as always, this has been great. You know, anything you guys are involved with, you know, on Wednesday next week, let me know, or you can shoot it to Erica or Jana. Like I said, I've still got some conversations to have with Erica. I just know that she's going to be on. I don't know if Jana's going to wind up being on or not. But like I said, I want it to be kind of a celebration of, you know, people's voices being heard for this cause. So anything you have that you can add to that, just let me know. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. And I was going to say, if people aren't near a location where there is a protest, we're encouraging people to like hold up a sign that says Justice for Evan and take a picture of it and post it on social media with the hashtag Justice for Evan, just to like keep the conversation going, keep it alive and on March 9th. And
absolutely. That's a good idea. Need to get with Jana on that. Tell her to, I'll start helping her spread that too. So, but anyway, you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thank you so much. Is it still cold up there?
It is. Yeah.
Well, you're gonna be mad. It's gonna be 80 degrees here tomorrow. So
enjoy it.
We'll try to. But anyway, you have a wonderful night, and we'll be speaking to you soon. Everybody, Wednesday, March 9th. It's important. We need a good showing for this one. See everything that happened that day. So everybody have a great night, and we will see you next time.